think we're ready to begin. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 5G community meeting. We are delighted to have over 100 people on the Zoom, not on the Zoom, excuse me, on the Facebook Live. Continue to tell folks that we're on, share it, do a watch party if you wish. And we definitely want to answer as many questions as you may have, so feel free to put them in the chat. At this time, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and we're going to get started with the conversation about 5G and how it affects us if it comes to Newark, and how it affects us, and just learning more about it.
So I guess I'll start, Andrea. Sure. My name is Kenyatta Stewart. I'm the City of Newark's Corporation Counsel. I run the law department here for the City of Newark. We're responsible with working with, Mr. Van Eaton, with, different providers to provide the legislation for the City Council to, consider. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, I'm Joe Van Eaton. I'm with Best and Krieger in Washington, D.C. I represent only localities. I represent localities all over the country and work developing ordinances and regulations and manuals that govern the placement of wireless facilities.
And good evening. My name is Philip Scott. I am the Director of Engineering for the City of Newark. My department will be actually accepting the applications, doing the review and issuing of the permits for the new 5G systems or networks that's going to be coming to the city.
Okay, so thank you, gentlemen. I guess I'm the only lady on the Zoom as of this time. I just want to reiterate to everybody that if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Also, if you see me keep peeking over, it's because we're on Zoom and you're on Facebook Live, so I'm trying to capture all of the questions so that when it becomes time for question and answers, we can, I hope not to forget anybody. Also, Lavita Johnson from Newark People's Assembly will also assist with the Q&A portion of the meeting. So gentlemen, whomever wants to start explaining what 5G is, that's appreciated. Many people just really don't know what 5G is.
Wait, you want me to start? I can start, Phil. I can start.
Yeah,
good evening, everyone. We really appreciate you all getting involved to sit in on a discussion about 5G. So essentially what 5G is a process or a program that will allow different networks, internet, phone providers, and things of that nature to, bring services to the city of Newark and of course throughout the country. The idea is that 5G will speed up what we know as, telephone providers access. So for example, when you make a phone call, there's different, poles that, telephone poles that give us the service. Your 911 calls should be faster because of course, sometimes when you call 911, you don't realize it, but you might be calling New York, Jersey City, or other places. The idea is that the 5G is supposed to speed up that process. And of course, the internet and cell phone capability so that it can be faster than what we have now. I remember, back in the day, we used to have to plug our, computers up into the wall. We had to wait for that sound to go through before we was able to get internet. And we hope that it would be faster and faster, and probably dating myself. But my point is, this is just technology that service providers have, offered to the city and throughout the country to give the community an opportunity to have faster and more capable service.
Absolutely. And just to add on to that, it's really about, the wireless technology as the phones get smarter and smarter and we have more and more devices. It's going to require that we have a network that can handle all of those additional devices and the bandwidth that's going to be required to operate these different devices. So, right now, the technology that we're used to and that is commonplace is the 4G. 5G is basically the next generation of the technology that's going to be used for wireless service.
Yeah, and that's correct. And the 5G is not going to replace 4G anytime soon. What you're going to see is both networks rolling out. In fact, what I am seeing in most communities that are getting applications is they're actually filling in holes in their 4G network still. There's a lot of places where it's difficult, and everybody will have experienced this, where you go into a building and you lose coverage, or you drive down a certain street and you lose coverage, or it takes a long time to connect to the network. For some reason, the call doesn't seem to go through. All those are network type problems, and they're going to solve that with a combination of both additional 4G, but also as rollout of 5G, which right now is actually fairly limited in the number of places it's actually available with its full capabilities.
Okay, gentlemen, are we ready for Q&A, or is there more? Anybody? I know you have somewhat of a presentation, Mr. Stewart. Is that a presentation, or is it just to answer questions?
Well, I mean, we could do a combination of both. I mean, essentially, one of the things that we don't want to happen is we don't want to lose control, right? So I'm sure people are wondering, why can't we wait for 5G to become, ready? Excuse me. Why can't we wait until we're ready to have 5G? Part of the issue that we have is that, we don't necessarily have control over the possibility of stopping people from adding 5G to the city of Newark. And I say that with the sense that people who are these providers who are interested in, providing the service, they can file an application, and now we have a shot clock. There's a deadline that starts, and if we don't respond to them in writing, and if we don't respond to them in writing and explain what we dislike about their application, we lose our right to regulate, what they're going to do in the city. One of the things that I'm concerned with, and I know the mayor and the city council is concerned with, is, of course, the health issues and the way it's going to look. We don't want 5G to turn Newark into, the Jetsons or what have you, right? And again, I'm probably dating myself, but my point is, we don't want to change the look of the city because of the internet service providers, ideas. So one of the things that we have to do is regulate through an application process, the way things are going to look. So for example, and I'm going to use, part of Joe's presentation if he doesn't mind, but what we don't want to happen is this, right? We don't want this to be our 5G throughout the city of Newark, right? We don't want to walk past, different parts of Broad Streets or, throughout downtown or in the neighborhoods to see this, right? Imagine if your cat climbs up the pole, or the squirrels will climb up the pole and they climb up into this, right? Just imagine that. Imagine if you live next to a house that this thing here is, outside of your house. So we want to regulate that, right? It's clear that these people who put this contraption up, what looks like a robot next to a pole, right? The people who put that up took advantage of that municipality, right? And we don't need that to happen here. We're not going to let it happen here. So because of the fact that if you do not respond and explain, and you can't just say no. You can't just say, no, we're not letting you do it, right? So you have to respond back in writing to justify what it is that they have to change as far as the aesthetics, underground, or what have you. If you do not do that, you lose the opportunity. So, and we're probably going to show these pictures later on again, but again, using Joe's presentation, I would prefer this. And I'll get a little closer. I would prefer this, right? I would prefer this clean look here. This is it looks like a light fixture, and on top of it, there's an item there, right? That's the same thing as that other contraption that I just showed you, right? I would prefer having this look in the city of Newark as opposed to that big robot thing. Well, if you get a little closer, this one is a little lighter, well, I would prefer this, right? Again, very, very, sleek look. It almost looks like, what are those panels that people have on their houses, right? When that came out, solar panels, right? Everybody was concerned about the fact that we would be walking around. It looks like a bunch of mirrors on people's houses, right? So again, this is no different, right? We want to make sure that the aesthetics in the city doesn't change based on internet. You're on mute, Joe.
I do think it's worth emphasizing a lot of this is driven by federal law and regulations. So it's not even a state of New Jersey issue versus Newark. This is the federal government and what the FCC has required. And that is driving the way things have to be regulated all around the country.
Okay, so at this time, I'm going to start the question and answer portion of the meeting. We have gotten quite a few questions. Fortunately or unfortunately, there are many of the same. So that just goes to show us that people have the same concerns. And if you're just tuning in, this is the 5G community meeting. We will be presenting this information to council, the municipal councils. So we definitely want your voices to be heard. So please share your concerns, your suggestions, your yays or your nays about 5G coming to the city, and we will forward the information. So the first question that I have, and there's quite a few concerns about health dangers, and according to the internet and health experts, it said that they're dangers. Why should we in Newark be exposed to the radiation? Or is there in fact radiation that comes from 5G?
So there is radiation that comes from every type of radio device, not just 5G, but also 4G, 3G, and the biggest source of the radiation for most people is actually their cell phone. And that's one of the reasons why you normally hear health experts say, don't hold it too close to your head, hold it certain ways from your body, use Bluetooth, use headphones, don't keep it up at your ear. And most of the studies that people read about actually deal with the radiation from those devices, the devices we actually hold in our hands. Now, the antennas do issue radiation, and there's a lot of debate going on as to exactly what the impact of that radiation is on people and whether it has a bad effect. The problem for Newark is federal law explicitly prevents you from regulating the placement of wireless facilities based on RF. It's simply forbidden, and that's one ground on which a court will almost always say, if you did it on that basis, I'm going to order the city to allow the placement of the wireless facility.
I'm sorry, Joe, we said RF. What's RF, Joe? Just for the
Radio frequency emissions. That's the radiation that people are concerned about. So what we do as part of the regulations, and what Newark is proposing to do, is to regulate those RF emissions, the radiation, as much as is permitted under federal law. So anybody who comes in is going to have to show exactly what sort of emissions they have, what the areas, and sort of what areas surrounding the antenna are dangerous. It's really important to understand that RF radiation gets weaker and weaker the further it gets from the antenna. And depending on the power of the antenna, the distance at which there's a real risk could be very, very small, 5 feet, for example, or less. If you have a Wi-Fi device at your home, those actually emit RF emissions. They have radiation, but you have to be literally, you would have to be holding it up to your head to be affected by it. You have to be that sort of close to it. So the city would be making sure that every facility complies with FCC regulations, and also that there's a clear understanding of what areas are risky and that they're marked off so that people don't accidentally get exposed to radiation in a way that would harm them. And in fact, in some cases, that will mean they can't be placed in certain areas where the public could have access to them easily or be exposed to excessive amounts of radiation.
So just to, touch on that. So that's why the regulations are important, right? So that we can, tell these providers what not to do. I personally would not want there to be a situation where we have, a multi-level building and there's, a antenna next to the building, right? Because while we recognize that there will be nobody on top of the antenna, right? Obviously, right? But we don't want people to be next to it. So I don't want a situation where my window is right here and the antenna is right here. Because God forbid, if I look out the window, I'm very, very close to the radiation, right? So we want to make sure that they're within the guidelines within the city of Newark. There's a spacing requirement, right? And we want to make sure that they can't point the antennas at my window, right? Because that's another thing. I don't need that either, right? So those are the things that, the engineering department is going to have to consider when we have these different applications coming from Verizon and, Sprint and everybody else that's going to be, making an attempt. And I got to tell you that, they have already, been involved in the process because they're dying to file the applications. And we've been holding this off for a good while, because of everything else that's been going on, of course, COVID and things of that nature. But more importantly, because of the fact that we want to get it right. We don't want to be in a space where, the people in the city of Newark or any other parts of New Jersey, as far as I'm concerned, because most of the time, as we do with the rest of the city, rest of the state does it, that, the people in the city have to worry about, radiation. And of course, as I said earlier, the city looking like a bunch of robots next to the poles.
At this time, I'd like to introduce my co-moderator for the Q&A session, Lavita Johnson. So we're going to alternate asking questions and paying attention to the Facebook feed.
Great. Good evening, all. Thank you for joining. So we have another question. That question is, where are you putting the 5G towers? Because I know that they are small towers that can sit on buildings. How far would the towers be away from our homes, and how safe are they?
It's like a Phil question.
So in terms of the placement of the towers, more than likely they're going to go in the public right of way on the existing utility poles that run throughout the city. There is the opportunity for them to go onto private buildings, but that is going to be up to the individual ownership of those buildings. For the most part, it's going to be on the utility poles in the public right of way. In some instances, we will be replacing some of the utility poles to put these 5G equipment onto them. So it's not really going to be any different than the way that we already have, our public utility services already, whether it be Comcast or Verizon and PSE&G. So this equipment is going to occupy the same spaces that's already being used for public utilities.
I think it's also important to note that, the city we can't tell these providers that, no, we're not going to give you access to the telephone poles we have, right? Am I right, Phil? That's what the biggest difference is that we can't just say no.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, the FCC regulates, this whole thing. We're just able to, I guess, on a local level, provide some feedback as to what we would like to see with regard to, this deployment. But ultimately, we cannot say no. This is something that's based on federal mandate or federal law, basically.
Right. What we're prohibited from doing, we can't do anything, that would effectively prohibit the provision of a personal wireless service. So we can try to be as protective as we can be within the limits of federal law. But some wireless facilities are going to be going in the rights of way, whether they're 4G facilities or 5G facilities. We'll see how that ends up playing out. But basically, the sort of control we typically look to provide is to make sure they're not close to somebody's windows. They're far enough away that there's no risk of radiation exposure from the antennas. And the antennas aren't sending out gigantic beams in a big circle. They're really pretty much focused in a narrow range where there's going to be a significant issue. And the idea is to put the placement in some place where it's not only safe from the perspective of all the citizens, but also to make sure that it doesn't destroy the aesthetics of the city. That it's not, that somebody doesn't have to look out at an ugly antenna like the one we saw in the picture at the beginning outside their window or their door. So those are the sorts of things the FCC does give us some authority to control. We can try to make everything fit in with the design of what's already in the neighborhood. That's part of what it is keeping the character of the city and making sure that areas that the city is spending effort to redevelop, that what goes in there fits in with what's being, with the redevelopment efforts as well.
So there is a lot of chatter on Facebook about how 5G already exists and how it's been around for years, and that they've already been accessing it on their cell phones. Can someone speak to that truth or myth?
So it's something of a myth in this sense. And actually AT&T in particular changed, as you all know, on your cell phone, you can look at the phone and it'll tell you, I've got LTE or 4G or 3G. Well, a couple of years ago, AT&T set up its system so that it would tell people they were connecting to 5G, even though they weren't actually connecting to 5G. 5G isn't sort of one thing. It can actually be used as a marketing device. Some of you who've been around for a while will remember when 4G came out, everybody said, oh, we've got the biggest and fastest 4G network. Well, it turned out a lot of times the network actually wasn't 4G. So when you're talking about 5G, carriers pretty much get to define what 5G is on their own for marketing purposes. For the actual purpose of what it fits within the international standards of 5G, those standards were just finalized relatively recently. And actually, not all the standards that are 5G related have been finalized. I think they'll be finalized next year. So we're going to see this technology roll out as different elements of it become ready for rollout. But it really hasn't been commercially, it really hasn't been used sort of for commercial purposes in this country until very recently. In fact, the first 5G phones, I think, rolled out a year and a half ago.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to combine a couple of these questions. The first part is, who provides 5G? What country does it come from? And will this enable Newark residents to have free home internet services as previously reported?
So 5G refers to a set of standards that describe how a wireless network works. And it includes a lot of different elements. So one element is, in a 5G network, it describes how you can use very, very high frequencies and relatively low frequencies to send great deals of data at high speed. That's one element of 5G. Another element of 5G allows you to coordinate communication between facilities more effectively, so that you're able to use the wireless more effectively. So it's actually, the technology is being developed internationally. The companies that are developing the equipment, and this is something you may have seen in the news, is I think one of the big providers of 5G equipment is Huawei. But there are also European and American companies that are developing equipment that will be 5G, be used in the provision of 5G as well. So it really deals with a wireless system. You're always dealing with managing radio frequencies, managing all kinds of different frequencies. And you're also dealing with a lot of computer programming that tells how those will be coordinated and managed with one another. And so it's a very complex set of standards. And the equipment's coming right now. A lot of the equipment is coming from China, but there are certainly competitors who are developing equipment in a big effort to sort of encourage development or use of 5G equipment that's either United States or European manufactured.
Okay, thanks for that. Mr. Stewart, can you please show those pictures of what we don't want versus what we like to see in the tower examples?
Sure. So I start off with what we don't want. This is what we do not want. This thing here.
Just place it a little closer. We can see it, but put it directly into the camera.
Is that good? How are we looking?
Forward. There you go.
Right. So this thing here is it looks like a telephone pole, but it has a bunch of things next to it, right? These different blocks are the different contractors that the different, I'm assuming, let's just say if it's phone wireless company one, another one, they're all, bunched up together. If you notice, there's a person right here. You see how low this person is, how close it is to the person? Versus this situation here, right? We have a more sleek, the contraption is essentially on top of the light pole. Over here on this one here, the same thing, right? That's so much more better looking than that big packet that I just showed you all. And then finally, I'll give you some more examples, right? These items here are the same, sort of the same purpose.
It's out the screen. Can you move it over to your left?
Left. Better?
Yes.
You understand? So it serves the same purpose as, the first picture with all the boxes next to the pole.
Thank you for the visual.
Okay, great. So here's another question. Did the public, homeowners, or taxpayers have any say in having these poles placed in our communities?
Does the public, you said?
Does the public, homeowners, or taxpayers have any say in having these poles placed in our communities?
Well, essentially, the most important part of this Zoom is to get, the community's feedback, right? We recognize that, we don't want to just have this thing going and the community doesn't have a say-so and, some of the comments don't have information. We want the community to first have the information of what it is, what the possibilities of what it can look like, and, to give comments because the council members will be, considering this on the next council meeting. I do think that it's important for us to also keep it in mind that when we use the word say-so, we have a say-so over the way they look. We have a say-so over, in a certain extent, of where they're gonna be. And if you own a piece of property, you have the say-so on if it's gonna be on your property. The government, the city, the municipality does not have a say-so over, not necessarily say-so, we cannot stop it from happening, right? We cannot, so what happens is they file an application. I believe, tell me if I'm right, Joe, I think it's 90 days on an existing pole, 60 days on an existing pole, 90 days on a non-existing pole, right? So once they put the application, we have 60 to 90 days to respond. Now, if we do not respond, they file an application to the court and we lose our ability to regulate, right? So what happens is at that point, we run into a situation where if they want to put up, that picture that we talked about earlier that we did not like, This thing, we have no say-so, right? So I would prefer be in a space where, we see the application, we do the evaluation, we say, no, we know the neighborhood. You can't put it close to XY building. You can't put it near XY place because of the following reasons. Because you have to recognize that even if we say no, they have the ability to file another application to explain what they're going to do different. And then eventually, you got to expect the fact that they're going to get it right.
And there are some cases where you can say no. We've successfully said no in some cases to some applications. What we can't do is simply say nowhere in the city of Newark can this happen. And technologically, we're confined by how far, what it takes to provide coverage in an area. It's not as simple as just putting up one tower in one part of the city and that'll serve the whole city. That just doesn't work anymore. The reason they're putting up so many facilities is because there are so many users putting so many demand on the system. And you can think of these cells as literally like a honeycomb, and each one serves a certain area. And to serve all the people who have wireless phones, you need more cells in a community, or else the system starts breaking down. And by the way, if folks are interested, I've got more pictures and I can sort of run through some of the choices that can be thought of as we're coming through, because I think you're right. The idea of doing this is to get some feedback as to what works, not where it will work always, and what are the areas we want to especially make sure we avoid placement or discourage placement as much as we can.
Sure. So we do have quite a few more questions, but I would appreciate seeing some of those renderings.
So let me see if I can. I think I've got my share screen. Hold on one second. So I'm going to share I'm going to share something, and tell me when folks can. I obviously can't see it quite as well as
we can see.
Okay, so there's some part of these pictures was shown. This is an actual installation. So on the bar left, on what's my left, that's the pole as it originally was designed. This is one variation on the pole. Those are the antennas. This is the electronic equipment which goes to the antennas. Because one part of a wireless facility always has antennas and something called a radio unit, which is often put in a box here. So this one and this one over here, those are the radio unit. That's the radio unit. That's the antennas. This one, the radio units have been put on the ground in something that was designed to look like a mailbox.
I thought that was a mailbox.
Yeah, I know. I haven't seen mailboxes. We haven't had mailboxes. We've got so few mailboxes now in DC. It's pretty amazing. But that's the idea. It's right there in the mailbox. It's not on the pole anymore, and so that's what it looks like. So that's one type of design. This is a design by a company called T-Mobile. This is an example from Austin, Texas, and here what they've done is disguise it in a traffic signal. And that's really good for the carrier because you get to cover what they're really concerned about with these devices is covering the roadways. And this sort of look would be very good for it. All the radio is in this little base, is in this base right here. So this looks like an ordinary street light, ordinary traffic signal. There's the antenna. That's the radio units. Okay. We're working with a completely residential neighborhood in California. So they don't have any traffic signals. They don't even have any street lights. They don't have many utility poles. So this is the design the company came up with there. You can see how it's intended to blend in with the background. The radios are there. That's the antenna. It's 35 feet high. And you notice it's put away from any, this is actually a public building. It's put away from any, from the front of any house. The idea was you can't put it in front of any house. You try to put it at a corner or someplace where it won't be in somebody's view.
So Joe, on that picture, the last picture, is that on the street or is that in the backyard or something like that? What is that?
That's literally in the street. There's the stormwater right there. This one, I gotta say, is not one of my favorite.
I can't hear him anymore. Can you guys hear?
No, Joe, we can't hear you. Still nothing. It doesn't appear that you're muted.
No, I think am I back yet?
You're good.
Okay. Yeah, this one is not one of my favorites because I think the pole's a little bit too thick, but you can see the idea. Again, this is obviously single family residences. It would look very different, I think, on an urban streetscape. I don't think it would be quite as, this seems to stand out to me. But the other one is the one, this is from a design from San Antonio, Texas. This is the one you were showing where everything is inside the pole. That's the antennas up there. The radio units are in this base. And then that's just the regular support structure. And then a lot of times what they want to use is regular, let's see. This is another street light design. This is in an area near a shopping mall. The antenna and the radio units are up there, and the antenna, and those are the radio units right there. Nothing else on the pole. Okay, on wooden poles, you get something slightly different. You have a choice of putting things at the top, or there's often an option for putting it in what's called the communication space, the space near the telephone lines. So in this case, the community said, you know, we really don't want these poles to get a lot higher. We'd like you to put it in this communication space. So this is the utility pole today. That's the wireless facility. The antenna's there, the radio's over there, and that's all that's on that pole. So that's using the communication space. And you can see, to my eyes, and I don't know that everybody would agree, it looks a lot like a regular utility pole, which is actually, to me, a good idea. The other opportunity, the other thing people do, is this. And this one, there's a little box, there's a box down here, the antenna's out here, but you can see it's on the sidearm, right? And this is one where you put it at the top. There's the existing utility pole. They make it a little, they have to replace it, and they put the antenna and the radio units up at the top. But the idea, in contrast to the one that you saw earlier with all that junk on it, is to have things up as high as possible. And anything that down here be as narrow as possible. Because the idea is what people see out of their houses or run across on the streets is going to be right here at this level, not that level. And of course, the higher up this is, you're going to find that radiation is going out in this direction and that direction. It is not going that way.
So it doesn't go down, you're saying, Joe?
Yeah, in fact, one of the places where it's, if you wanted to avoid radiation, one of the safest places is right underneath the antenna. Because if you think about it, they don't want to serve the person standing under the antenna. They want to serve a bunch of people along a street. So they want to send the signal out, not just down, just like you would with a flashlight, right? If you wanted to light something up, you could show your feet, or if you want to look out, you want to and show more, you have to point it out. So those are some examples of sort of how you can try to set up design standards to sort of pick what you like, what fits in with your neighborhoods, and then write standards to try to say, this is what we want to do. And if you don't do it the way we like it, we're going to require you to show that we're preventing you from providing service.
Thanks so much, Joe, for that presentation.
Let me see
I
if
think that what other cities have done as far as the sleek, clean look is what we would want in the city of Newark, when in fact this does come, because we have heard now that it is coming. So it's just a matter of, you know, how it looks when it comes and what parameters we want placed, specifically on the companies that are installing it here to a certain degree. That's what I hear. But moving forward, and not trying to be distracted by a lot of the naysayers on the Facebook feed, there are questions about not so much the say-so that the residents have, but are there limitations in which the residents can place on where the poles are positioned and or the actual equipment, what poles they're going to be installed on, if they're near schools, if they're near hospitals, those type of things.
to a degree, yes. I mean, and some of those things will seem really, some of those things won't be difficult, but the overall goal is you can't have a lot of gaps. You can't have set up standards that result in somebody being unable to create a network that actually provides service throughout the city. So, and I think you will find that you'll be surprised how much wireless there actually is that has nothing to do with what the city allows, right?
Joe, can you, I apologize for interrupting, but can you speak specifically about, and I see this question coming up a lot, the amount of installation happening in the inner city versus the suburban areas?
So it's actually pretty varied. The thing that's 5G is rolling out in dense urban areas faster than it's rolling out in rural areas. And suburban areas, I think it depends largely on what the carriers see as what would be most profitable. Okay. There is a real problem we do see with broadband in urban areas where there is a lot of poverty. There's just no question. It's very difficult. And we also know that in a lot of cases, the only broadband option available to poor families is a mobile broadband option. You can't have both a wire, you know, you basically have an economic choice between having a phone, a wireline connection for broadband, or a phone that does both broadband and telephone and everything else. We know that's a national problem. I've worked a lot with Los Angeles, and there's a tremendous portion of the population there that does not have good broadband access. One of the things I think, unfortunately, what I think is actually happening in terms of patterns of 5G deployment is that it's not really rolling out in the poorest parts of urban areas. That's not something the federal government requires, and it's not something the federal government allows localities to require right now. What we are trying to do is set up a model that will allow Newark, assuming we can prevail on the law, to actually set up a system where it can get money that can help fund broadband deployment throughout the community. All we can do right now is create that opportunity in the words, because right now the FCC limits what you can charge these wireless providers for entry into your community. San Jose, before the FCC adopted the rules, actually got several carriers to agree that for every wireless, whenever they put up something on a light pole that was owned by the city, they would put money into a fund that could be used to support broadband to the poorest neighborhoods in San Jose. That's something the FCC literally stopped. But that's really, it's a problem in the way this deployment is occurring.
And just as far as benefits to the community, I got to tell you that I do recall one or two of the providers, speaking out during the last council meeting, talking about job opportunities and things of that nature. I think that it's important for us to hold them accountable. That if you're going to be putting these things up in the city, we got to make it our business so that our people within the city are working on installation and maintenance of these poles. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're bringing it here, you're benefiting from it. You can't get a community benefit because, of course, we get faster speed, all the alarms and things of that nature. But how does that look as far as dollars and cents? And I think it's important for us to make sure that we hold them accountable.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir, for that. So I'm going to combine another question. So if you don't live in a residential area, do you need a desktop or laptop to use it? Or is everyone in an urban community need a cell phone only? What is the usage for it? Is the city going to put specific requirements on buildings such as height and locations for the 5G towers?
So a lot of 5G is actually rolling out inside of buildings. And it's driven not by what the city does, but what the building owner does in terms of providing for connectivity within the building. And that's particularly true in commercial areas or in places where, in sports arenas, for example, a lot of times, if you've ever been in a sports arena and wonder and notice people are, you go into a sports arena and people are looking at their cell phones all through the game so they can get better, they can actually watch the game better in the TV than from the seats that I can afford anyway, so they're actually these wireless facilities are going up in commercial areas at the behest of the owners of those facilities. I'm sure that every major community that has a convention center, a sports arena, they're working with the carriers to make sure they have coverage. Any commercial business owner is worried about doing that as well. So they're all looking to get wireless coverage there. The areas that are often so you'll have that, and we'll have a lot I think you will see in Newark a lot of rollout in the downtown area where there's a lot of traffic, especially a lot of vehicular traffic. That's ideal for these folks. The residential areas are actually slightly, that's going to be more of a case-by-case basis. So everybody is moving to mobile solutions. They're not getting rid of fiber optics. I mean, it's important to understand that the only thing that makes wireless work is actually wires, because every one of these towers is connected to a wire that carries the signal back to someplace else. So you're actually going to get a combination of wires and wireless going forward in the future. And people are going to want the ability to pick up something and go somewhere else with it.
So let me ask a question though. So, and from the last question that Levita asked a few moments ago, it sounds like the community is concerned about the fact that there's going to be people within the city of Newark who may not have everything that, would normally, benefit this contraption, right? Have you ever seen a space where municipality says, listen, if you're going to put 5 of these towers up in downtown to speed up the internet downtown, you need to put 5 up somewhere in the neighborhood to make sure they get the same service?
That was what San Jose was trying to do before the FCC rules came out. And frankly, if the FCC rules are overturned, and I'm part of a group that's trying to overturn those rules, I'd expect more communities to look at sort of that. I want a little bit of a quid pro quo here. I'm happy to let you use my streets. I don't need a lot of money to let you use my streets, but I do need my community covered, right? Right now, I think it's fair to say that the community's biggest weapon there is sort of a moral force, is keeping track of what's happening and holding carriers to task if it appears they're discriminating in their rollout, because that is something that's actually quite powerful. I know a couple of the carriers have responded in cases where communities have said, I'm curious why you're building out this area, but not this other area in my community. And there's often been a response of, maybe we'll build out that other part of the community.
So, Joe, actually, what you just stated in response to Levita's question is really interesting, because the pulse of what's the conversation on the news feed is that people don't want it in their neighborhoods, by the schools, by the hospitals. So it's like, I just don't know how to take it. We want the same things that's in the downtown area, but from what I'm reading on the news feed, they're saying, no, we don't want it by the homes. But of course, we would want the faster internet and all of the other benefits that come with it. But people are primarily concerned with the health risk. That's what everybody is really talking about. The radio frequency that you spoke about earlier, which we just call radiation.
Mm-hmm.
But that leads me to the next question. So if I'm not sure if you have this information, Mr. Scott, but how many installations are proposed?
So we haven't received, well, let me not say that. We have received people that have wanted to come and install these over the last year or so, but we have been holding them off. We've been waiting for us to get our process in place so that we can regulate it to the best of our abilities as much as the FCC will allow. So we have not permitted any new 5G installations in the city of Newark. So I know there's been a lot of talk about, that we already have 5G and things like that. The city has not permitted any 5G. I want to make that clear. So, until we get this ordinance passed and we come up with this plan as to how we're going to regulate it, we will not do any, even though we are under the guise of the FCC. Technically, we are supposed to and should have already approved a lot of these locations, but we have not yet. So until we get things under control and get this ordinance passed and put these guidelines in place, we are not going to approve any just yet.
And let me just say, one of the things, if you start looking at the studies, a lot of the studies or a lot of the things that are being written are concerned about something called millimeter wave technology. Millimeter wave is the very highest frequencies, right? If you're seeing 5G in Newark, there's a good chance it's the reverse of those high frequencies. There's one carrier, T-Mobile, that actually has frequencies in a low band, much lower frequency, lower than even is typically used for 4G. And they have been rolling out 5G because they can do it from big towers that are already in place without telling anybody what they've done. They just switch out equipment. It doesn't even require local approvals in most cases. So T-Mobile's actually advertising, if you go on their website, that they've actually installed 5G in several communities, but it's on towers that are really, really far away from homes and houses and schools and things like that. That may be what some of you are seeing if you're subscribers, but in terms of what we're talking about, which is these facilities in the rights of way, that's what the city's dealing with now. They're just preparing to deal with these facilities in the rights of way, and those are the facilities that will actually be closer to the residential units, not the big towers.
So should people within a building, in some of these big buildings, should they, send information out to the owners of the building saying we do not want the towers on our building, or that, how do we as a community come together to say what it is we want to happen or not, right? As far as on the private property that, we renting from.
So I think you can talk to the owners about it, but and some, particularly there's certain types of buildings where the residents have a significant control, or
Sure.
the owner is going to have be very sensitive. I would just urge everybody, don't assume that because a facility is on a building, that means the people in the building are being exposed to RF. Radiation. When I said standing underneath an antenna is one of the safest places to be because they're going out, the other place that we can see measurements for is when you put an antenna on the front of a building, the face of a building. It doesn't actually shoot into the building, it's shooting away from the building. The person who should be concerned about that antenna is not the person in the building, even if it's right outside their window. It's the person that's across the alley. Because again, think of a flashlight. It's not coming back at you're not seeing light on your hand. You're seeing light across the street, right? And that is, and from a lot of, don't assume that that saying no on a building is a bad idea or will result in a lot of radiation exposure. What does happen is if building owners all say no, there's only one place that those facilities can go, and that's in the street, right? They're going to have to get the coverage somewhere, and in some ways, having it on top of buildings or on the side of buildings can actually be a better alternative for a community than in the street. And obviously, I'm talking about high-rise buildings, not single-family homes or multiplexes.
Public housing, are they under the same requirements that we have as far as, not having the ability to necessarily say no, just give a blanket no?
That's a good question, because they are under an obligation to ensure that broadband, one of the requirements HUD developed a couple of years ago was a requirement to make broadband available within public housing projects as a condition as part of the funding. And honestly, I don't know how those housing projects are dealing with wireless.
Okay, so I have a number one question. Who owns 5G? Can you tell us that answer?
So when people say who owns 5G, the people who own, if you're talking about the frequencies, right, not the intellectual property and the software or who makes the equipment, the frequencies in this country are owned by the people of the United States. And the federal government has the authority to essentially decide how those frequencies can be used. And what they did several years ago, and what they've continued to do, is auction off frequencies to the highest bidders. So T-Mobile and AT&T and the former Sprint and Verizon Wireless all purchased huge chunks of spectrum from the federal government, and that's what they're using to deliver wireless services. The FCC has not decided how it's going to allow use of the highest frequencies, the millimeter wave frequencies, whether it's going to auction those off or let anybody who has the technology use them and share them. They're in the process of figuring that whole thing out. But basically right now, the frequencies that are used for what we think of as wireless service are basically auctioned off. Now, the things you think about, like for Wi-Fi, for your home Wi-Fi, those are shared frequencies. Anybody who has a Wi-Fi box can put them up. And in fact, if you walked around Newark, I'm pretty sure you'd find that your cable operator has put up Wi-Fi all around the city. So you can, like in Washington, D.C., I can walk down the street. Comcast is our cable provider. And I can, with my wireless phone, I can get a Wi-Fi signal from Comcast almost everywhere in the city. And I can use that to make cell phone calls instead of using my cell phone plan. So that's also happening, and that's all shared frequencies. Anybody can use it. It's nobody owns it, just the people do.
There's a question on Facebook that I can't get back to, and I really wanted to ask it. So I'll ask this question. We have time for about 2 more questions, and I hope I can scroll back up and find that question because I really want to know the answer to it. But you already mentioned, and I like to preface by some information that's already been shared for the people that just joined in. So we know that the 5G towers are primarily installed in the dense areas, which Newark is very dense and it's a densely populated area. But is there an opportunity that they are not installed in our residential areas? So it's like, I think I know the answer, but the people want to know, hear it from you. So we're saying that, yes, it primarily is in the inner city and densely populated areas, but if the community doesn't want them in the residential areas, is there a possibility that they won't be installed there?
So it won't be because the community doesn't want it there. I think directly, I think our ability to say a particular technology can't be used is very limited. We could say no to 5G if we could show that cell phone service from a particular provider is fine in that area, even without the 5G antennas, right? But everybody should understand 5G and 4G all have involved radio frequency emissions. And a lot of the data on radio frequency emissions deal with frequencies that are in use right now for 4G. Okay, so getting rid of 5G doesn't get rid of the radio frequency emission problem. It doesn't get rid of the radiation problem. That exists today. It's an issue where we're suggesting that more stringent standards need to be adopted by the federal government. But as I mentioned at the beginning, Newark can't do anything about it. What a lot of people are asking is, does this 5G model actually make sense economically for the carriers in any place but the richest areas? The areas where there's a lot of commerce going on, or areas where there's huge disposable incomes. And nobody knows the answer to that yet. It's sort of, it's just, it's an uncertainty. The people are asking, will people pay more money to get higher data speeds on their phone? I don't know what the answer to that is. I mean, I'm pretty happy with the data speed on my phone. I don't know that I'd pay an additional $50 to be able to download, to be able to watch the NBA, assuming the NBA is still playing in a month. I don't know that I'd pay an extra $50 to download it to watch it on my phone or my tablet. I just don't know. A lot of these plans assume that instead of getting television via cable or via satellite, that people will pay extra money in order to get it via a special antenna that will be put in their home that will receive the 5G signal, right? I don't know that I'd put an antenna in my window to get a wireless signal when I'm perfectly happy with my service from wireline. So there's a lot of uncertainty about this. There's a lot of hype about the technology is incredible. I mean, the differences between this technology and the last technology are significant. But whether that translates into something that will roll out into residential neighborhoods, I don't think anybody can say for certain right now. And of course, I do think there is a difference between urban areas like Newark and even like DC. For those of you who've been down to DC, our buildings aren't nearly as tall. we've got a 12-story limit, so our densities aren't nearly as great in the city. There's a lot of it's just not that type of multifamily dwelling unit. So I think that sort of dense area, the multifamily dwelling, those might be, but it's not obvious that that it's going to roll out into the residential areas really fast.
Appreciate that. Lavita, I'm going to defer to you for this question, and then I found the other question. So we'll end it with, so 2 more now.
The main question is that people wants to know, most of the cell phones have 4G currently. We're moving to 5G. How much more power will it give us, and how much more radiation will it seek out?
From the actual device, you're saying?
I'm so sorry?
Are you saying from the actual device? They want to know that?
The towers, the phones, the laptops, the computers, any which way that the 5G is traveling.
So I don't know the actual specs on the emissions from a 4G phone versus a 5G phone. I would be shocked if they're dramatically different, but because there are limits on the emissions from those phones that are meant to limit the amount of radiation you're exposed to. But obviously, for right now at least, you clearly have an option of buying only a 4G phone if you're worried about 5G. You don't have to buy 5G. In fact, if you want 5G right now, you have to pay basically another $500 for your phone. So, I'd have to look up the specs, but I just don't know them offhand.
And I'm going to present this question back to Director Scott. Can you repeat your previous statement? Also, too, I just want to make sure I get this right. Is 5G currently in the city of Newark? And if so, if the people don't decide, how soon will it be here? And when is the city council going to vote on this actual project?
Man, that's a 3-piece question.
Yes. All right. So I'll take the last question first. The city council is expected to vote on this this coming Wednesday at the council meeting. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kenyatta?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. I believe the second question was, do we currently have 5G in the city? I can't say for certain. I could only say that we have not permitted any 5G towers in the city. The Department of Engineering has not issued any permits for any 5G technology. There could potentially be some 5G towers on some private buildings. As Mr. Van Eaton has mentioned, a lot of times these things are put on private buildings or on private other towers, as he mentioned how T-Mobile has already had things in place in certain areas. Whether they're in Newark or not, I do not know. I cannot speak to that. But in terms of anywhere in the public right-of-way, on any of the public utility poles, the city has not issued any permits for any 5G towers.
Okay, so in the perfect transparency of that Newark People's Assembly tries to provide, technically, no, there's not 5G, but no, technically there may be 5G in the city of Newark, but no, we have not permitted it or approved it to happen. That's
Correct.
good to know. Okay. All right. So when some of these phones are saying 5G, they actually may be tapping into a tower that has been installed in our city unbeknownst to us.
That is a possibility.
Okay, and so I did find the question that I wanted to ask. If the 5G towers are not placed in residential areas, which would be, the perfect world, will the current cell towers in operation be maintained and upgraded when needed? or is this a moot point because, you know, they're coming and we don't really have the say so?
Can you repeat that? I'm not sure I caught that.
I don't know that I can. Oh, yep. If the 5G towers are not placed in residential areas, because that's what that's what some of the community members are saying. They don't want it near hospitals or near schools or near our residences.
They want that to be part of the, in other words.
Yes.
Okay, I understand.
So if they're not in our residential areas, will the current cell towers that are, the current ones in operation be maintained and upgraded when needed?
So let me just I want to be as clear as possible. If you passed a rule that said no 5G in our city,
in our residential areas,
that would almost certainly be struck down, because that would be an effort to regulate technology that's solely under the control, to dictate what technology is used, and that's really up to the federal government. But what you can say is, if you already have coverage that's and the 5G isn't a material improvement to that coverage, right? If they're just seeming to be adding it in order to provide TV, for example, you may be able to say no then. But you aren't going to do it by directing it and saying no 5G. You're going to be saying, this is the standard you have to use when you go into a residential neighborhood. I want you to be able to use these types of designs and meet certain standards that I can enforce, okay? So we do try to build that into these ordinances. But the 4G, everybody thinks that 5G and 4G are not going to replace, are not exclusive. They're complementary, okay? That operators are going to continue to use the 4G facilities. They're going to want to install the 5G to take advantage of what it can do best and how it can work with the 4G networks. They aren't going, those existing technologies are not going to go away for a long time. And those of you who've had cell phones for a long time know you can still go to places and get a 1G, a first generation antenna that's still operating in some places. So it's when virtually everything disappears on your phone except your phone service. That's still possible.
That's the green phone.
The flip phone? is that the flip phone?
Green screen, right?
That's right. That's the phone my mom has.
All right. So I have to allow 2 more questions. Lavita has one and I have one, and then we are closing the meeting. It's now 8:15 and it's a Friday evening. So even though everybody is supposed to still stay home and stay masked up when they're out, it is a Friday evening. So we may have movies to watch and children to attend to and dinner to make. So last question, Lavita, please. And then I have one.
Great, thank you, Andrea. If the FCC is mandating that these companies can't install towers, whether the city wants it or not, what would be the benefits to the companies and or to the residents and or to the city?
Yeah, so it's somewhat twofold as far as the benefit for the community. The idea is, like I said earlier, faster speed on your internet and your phone coverage, and a better 911, coverage as far as being able to communicate. As I said earlier, sometimes you might reach out down 911 and they have to transfer you. They transfer you from New York or Jersey City to Newark. So hopefully that helps us in the space where we're able to save lives. The other thing is that the city has the ability to get what's called reasonable. Am I right, Joe? We use the word reasonable reimbursements for necessary skills that's needed to go through this application process. If we need experts and things like that. So the idea is that it shouldn't cost the city any money, right? We want to make sure that the city is at least made whole on any cost to go through this process, so we're not losing out on anything. As Joe said earlier, there's a lawsuit right now that community is fighting to get a community's benefit package, right? So that that community can benefit from this additional service, because we like to think that these networks are making money some way, somehow. And as I mentioned, the last part is during the council meeting, there were about maybe three or four providers on the line that, spoke to what they plan on doing, with the 5G if given the opportunity. And many of them spoke to the idea of, community benefits as far as jobs for the installation and maintenance of, the 5G towers and things of that nature. So, and I think that's our job within the administration and within the council to make sure that we hold them accountable.
Yeah, and I got to say that it's often hard, especially I'm getting up there in age, and a lot of people who are ending up actually showing up, who end up debating this are older, right? When I go and deal with businesses where the people who are running the businesses are in their 20s, they aren't interested in having a fixed system like we were used to. They certainly would never think of having a phone that had a wire connected to it the way I grew up with, right? That wouldn't even happen. And as COVID's developed, I've noticed almost every entrepreneur is moving to a touchless type system where I take my credit card, I insert it in a little cube, and it's communicating back wirelessly. So they don't touch me, I don't touch them. In this type of environment, wireless offers significant advantages for touchless transactions and communication and things like that. And the more you use it, the more towers you need. The more these systems have a limited amount of frequency, and it's not like everybody gets an individual frequency. Everybody's sharing the same set of frequencies. So it's like a tap of water's coming out. It's okay if there's only one glass. If you have 100 people trying to get water at the same time, nobody gets water. And they've got to deal with that problem, because that's the way we're now getting our water or our communications, is that wireless way. So that's really the benefit they're hoping to provide the community, is enough connectivity so that the way people conduct business going forward is viable. And you all remember in New Jersey when there were when Verizon tried to pull that sneak of getting rid of their telephone network and replacing it with wireless, and it was a lousy network, and all of a sudden businesses couldn't communicate. That's a killer for a community if the businesses no longer have a way to communicate.
Thanks, Joe. So last question, no exceptions. And this is the money question. So what benefit does the city get from having the 5G installations? What's the revenue that's generated to the city? And whomever's going to end the meeting, if you can just talk again about the health ramifications, if the radiation is actual, because that's the other big question that people want to know, how it will affect our health.
Before you even go a little further, and Joe, when you go into the COVID rumor as well. That's a fair opportunity to talk about it, because I've heard it half a dozen times on a Monday.
Yeah. So on the health, I think there's a debate as to what level of radiation is harmful or harmless, right? But I've talked to people I respect on both sides, right? And I think the interesting thing is the uniform feeling is the danger isn't really from these towers. It's from the way we carry and work with the phones themselves, because that's the thing that exposes us to the most radiation. So I personally would like to see the federal government doing some serious response to the studies that have been done. But but this is not a case where RF is causing, or radiation is causing COVID. That I don't know of anyone who takes that on any side, no matter how seriously you take it, who thinks that it's causing the corona or caused the coronavirus. The studies are all dealing with very high levels of radiation over a continuous period of time, and I think the risk is I think while we could be safer, I'm not sure that the risk is so high that you really need to think that putting up the towers themselves is what's going to cause the problem. I mean, we're talking radio units on the thing. So, and we're looking at this and we're challenging the FCC. That's part of the case we brought against the FCC to make them look at the issue more seriously. But it is not that right now the imminent that 5G is causing a lot of diseases. That's just not what's going on.
Thank you for debunking that rumor or that myth. Now, who's going to talk the money question? Who's going to address that?
All right, I'll take a stab at it, and then I'll let Kenyatta, back me up on it. So, in terms of the benefit for the city, make no mistake, the real benefit is going to be to the providers, first and foremost. They're going to see the direct benefit because it's going to allow for them to increase their revenue by increasing services. There will be an indirect benefit to the city as the residents of the city, a lot of them will want to make use of this new technology. And what it also does is it brings us into the future. There's new technology. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to run on this 5G network. So some of the things that, people have talked about, autonomous vehicles, those things are going to need that type of, 5G connectivity in order to be a reality. So, there's a number of different things, technology-wise in the future that's going to make use of that 5G network. So without it, we're going to be behind. So it's one of those things that, yes, we are concerned about the health and safety of our residents, but we also at the same time don't want to fall behind where we're a city that has basically, we shoot ourselves in the foot where we are not able to advance technologically because we don't have, the newest and latest, up-to-date network.
And, I want to, touch on the fact that, Newark, like many other cities, we always want the best for our kids. We always want the best for our communities. And, listen, I'm no expert at 5G. So, I have to take the advice from the expert. I'm going to continue to do research and continue to review whatever's out there. But I do want to look at the cup half full, right? I'm actually happy that so many of the providers wanted to come to Newark and have the conversation about it. Because normally what happens is there's this opportunity, right, for a community and we get it last, right? And I don't necessarily know how fast it's going through the state of New Jersey, but we've slowed down this process. The administration and the council has slowed down the process because we wanted to make sure, first of all, we understood what it was, that we did the necessary research to get a gist of this growing bit of information. But, yes, assume that 5G is beneficial. And if it's beneficial to our community in a way so that our kids can get faster internet service, that people who don't have a laptop or a desktop and they only have their phone can get internet access that, we've never had, right? I mean, you got to think about it. Imagine if this was back in the day, we use that word back in the day, when, we had to plug up to things, right? We had to plug up and, and again, I'm showing my age, but we wouldn't be in a space where it would be beneficial for us. So, while I'm like everybody else, I'm leery about something new, right? Because, let me be comfortable with my phone. I don't get a new iPhone because I know I get the kinks out, right? So I know, but on the other hand, if it is beneficial, I'm glad that the people of Newark will have a chance to benefit from it. And hopefully, we can regulate it in a space so that it can be furthest away from me and you, but beneficial for all of us. And that's the way I see it. If it's up to me, no, I don't want to be next to anybody's tower. But I know, like everybody else knows, that when your phone isn't getting service, when you're losing calls, and it's important, when you can't get on the internet, and if that's social media or business, it bothers you. So, I'm going to try to see the cup half full. I know Phil's going to continue to do his research, and Joe will continue to do his research, and the council members are all over the research as far as pulling information, and the business administrator and the mayor has been all over this as well. But the idea is, listen, it's foreign, but listen, I wasn't a part of the 4G conversation. I wasn't part of the 3G conversation or the 1G conversation. So at least we have an opportunity to be a part of the conversation, to have some input before it actually happens.
Thank you very much, everyone, for participating. It's been a very informative meeting. At this time, I'd like to specifically thank Mayor Baraka and the council members for just, tuning in, because I know some of them are watching, but more importantly, for their willingness to have us share this information with the community before it goes before a vote. Because of course, Newark People's Assembly's motto is make your voice heard. So although, we know that this is moving forward, don't fret and think that, the conversation that was had tonight was null and void. We definitely will take your comments, your suggestions, and those things that you didn't like, and relay that information in written form to the council members as well as the administration. So I thank you so much for your time and attention. We do have another session on Monday.
Okay.
We have another meeting on Monday at 12 noon, so it's going to be a lunchtime forum. And in essence, it's going to be the same type of meeting for those individuals who couldn't attend this one tonight at 7. So please spread the information. If you're willing, join us again, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much, Director Scott, Corporation Counsel Stewart, my partner, Ms. Johnson, and Mr. Van Eaton. We'll see you again on Monday.
Thank you.
Have a good night.